One should keep in mind while reading the following that not a single statement in the whole account is drawn from Christian sources, and that all doubtful passages purporting to be from the pen of non-Christian writers have been rejected. Nor has use been made of passages which, although undoubtedly genuine, come to us from the works of early Christian writers. That many of these latter are authentic, there can be no doubt whatever. Nevertheless, it has been thought best not to make use of them in building up a history which claims to be entirely independent of Christian sources. The writers quoted above and the passages given under their names are entirely above the suspicion of being influenced by Christianity, and therefore best serve the present purpose. Nothing therefore will be found in the following narratives which cannot be found in the witness of Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Lucian and Josephus. All important passages in the extracts from these writers have been numbered, and corresponding numbers have been placed after the passages, dependent upon them in the following. Should the reader therefore question our right to make this author's right to make any assertion found below, he is only to discover in the text of the witnesses that number which corresponds with the number attached to the sentence about which he is in doubt, and he will learn our grounds for doing so. The Gospel of Jesus Christ according to Jews and Pagans. In the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea and Herod was tetrarch of Galilee, but Herodias, Agrippa's sister, who now lived as wife to that Herod, who was tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, etc. Antiquities, book 18, chapter 7:1. And his brother Philip, tetrarch of Trachonitis, that's where he went to. He, Herod the Great, also gave Gaulonitis and Trachonitis and Punis to Philip, who was a son but brother to Archelaus by the name of a tetrarchy. In Antiquities, book 17, chapter 8, verse 1. There was one John whom men called the Baptist, and there's a reference number probably to information in the appendix at the back of this book. He was a good man and exhorted the Jews to exercise virtue by acting righteously towards men and with piety towards God, and having thus done to come to baptism. The people were much moved by his teachings and came about him in crowds, until Herod began to grow jealous of the great power which he, John, was gaining over their minds. And he thought they might start a rebellion and take over his kingship, kill him off and all that sort of stuff. It's just like his father, right? Scared that this baby Christ would grow up and take over his kingdom, right? And rule in his place. So he got paranoid. Herod was at this time living with the wife of his brother Philip. He was an adulterer. This was of course unlawful, as Philip was still alive. The woman's name was Herodias, and she had a daughter named Salome. Perceiving that John had such influence over the multitude, Herod judged it best to have him seized. When this had been done, he sent him to the castle of Machaerus as a prisoner, and there had him put to death. Basically what we've already read about this person, John the Baptist, and that after Christ's death and ascension, resurrection and ascension, these followers of the Christ continued on with their religion, still believing in him, even though he was dead and gone. And they all looked upon death as a matter of small consequence. This attitude was the natural outcome of a conviction that they would live forever, eternally, right? Have eternal life. For a like reason they despised the things of the world and regarded them merely as common property, for it had been impressed upon them that they were all brothers from the moments they converted, right, and accepted the Christ as their Saviour, Lord and Master, having forsaken the gods of the heathen, or the pagan gods, and the ones of the Romans declared by the Senate as gods, and the statues said to be worshipped. Worshipped their crucified sophist and lived in accordance with his laws. They turned, and having forsaken the gods of the heathen, worshipped their crucified sophist and lived in accordance with his laws, etc. They were accustomed to meet together upon an appointed day, etc., etc. They had books also, and it was customary for their teachers to expound these and comment upon them. We've actually read this in the earlier account. Okay, it's about Nero burning Rome. Conclusion. Surely this is a most remarkable history. There is no trace of any other thing similar to it in the history of the world. In the light of sober reason, are we not bound to confess that the only thing which could explain such a state of affairs would be the advent into the world of one who lived such a life as the Gospels claim for Jesus and taught at least similar lessons to those which he is said to have given to men? There is little to be added. We have seen that sometime between 26 and 37 AD a man was put to death in Judea by the Roman proconsul. He was a Jew. Well, he was under Jewish law, the Mosaic law, etc., right? As all the other Jews were. He was actually a Galilean, but still regarded as a Jew, right? And was put to death by a method considered as that time suited only to the lowest criminals, robbers, thieves, etc., all put up on a crucifix, justly punished, him being innocent. We learn that almost immediately after his execution, a body of people sprang up who affirmed that this crucified Jew was God. It is evident that by professing this belief, men endangered their lives, and it is equally evident that they could reap no material profit by pursuing such a course. And yet, in spite of the humiliating death of Christ, and in spite of the torture and death awaiting his followers, or them, anyone that followed him, the sect of the Christians increased and spread with marvellous rapidity. It gathered adherents or followers from all ranks and various nations, Greeks, Romans, etc., etc., because these disciples, apostles, travelled all over and spread the good news of Christ, the revelations of Christ. They despised the things of the world, they loved each other, they died for Christ's namesake, they were martyred, right? They died for what they believed in, the faith, right? And they conquered the world by their devotion. The Roman government pronounced Christianity a religio illicita, or illegal, a legal religion or practice, and Roman officials received orders to stamp it out. Then for more than 200 years the Christians suffered from the hatred of the world, Rome, etc., etc. Rulers attacked them with the sword and strove to annihilate them, completely wipe them out. Philosophers and scholars attacked them with the pen and strove to show the foolishness of their faith. And what happened? The Christians conquered the world by their very unworldliness, and before 300 years had elapsed after the slaying of Christ, a Christian emperor sat upon the throne of the Caesars. But was he really a Christian? Is it talking about Constantine, who was actually a pagan posing as Christian? You'd mix both, right? If that's the one you're talking about. This and what followed through the centuries is history. What tribe was able to resist him? What place was so remote that his followers did not enter it? Or what mountain range so high that it stopped their advance? It's talking about these disciples, these apostles, these followers of the Christ. In those days, the north of Europe was covered with vast tracts of forest inhabited by savage tribes, which were continually at war with each other and propitiated their deities with human sacrifices, or tried to appease their wooden, stone, straw gods of the imagination. When life was getting a bit tough, oh, here we go, we'll just kill this guy and chuck him on there as a way to ease the wrath upon us from these gods, the anger, right? And so forth. Men drank their liquor from cups fashioned out of the skulls of their unconquered enemies and slaughtered whole towns, men, women and children, from the very joy of bloodshed and the hopes of gain. Christians say that Christ claimed to be the light of the world. Whether the claim be true or not, each man must judge. This much we know, that with the gospel of Christ, light dawned upon the hearts of our fierce and bloodthirsty forefathers. Believing that Christ had suffered for them, they dared not be unmerciful as before. With the story of the gospel came the vision of tender and unselfish love. Little by little their hard hearts were softened. Gradually they learned love for their fellows. The old life became distasteful to them. The barbarities of war began to give way to nobler occupations. Today, what do we find? Much that is evil, doubtless, much selfishness still, and pride, and love of power, and money, all that is glitter and is gold. But these are the fading shadows of the night. The sun has risen, the light is growing, but down in the valleys there is darkness still. Yet, because there is darkness here and there, let us not say that it is still night. Historians, both Christian and non-Christian, with one accord, tell us that the light is steadily growing. Only the shallow-minded and those unacquainted with the history keep crying that the world grows more and more evil. Students of social economics tell us that never in the history of the world has there been such an era of philanthropic activity. Never has man felt such a deep responsibility for the welfare of his fellow man, or striven so unselfishly to assist him or help him. Again, we assert, knowing full well that every historian and student of human affairs will attest the truth of the assertion, that the light is growing brighter and brighter, and with each new century, every century evil practice become impossible which were countenanced in the century preceding. What is the reason of this advance? Some answer this question one way and some in another. One thing is certain, namely that the members of the Christian community, as described in sections 1 and 2, were manifestly controlled by sentiments absolutely in contradiction to the sentiments of the people among whom they were living. That the faith which they professed gave them a remarkable power of rising superior to the opposition and the corrupting influences of the age in which they lived, and that in their conception of mutual obligation, helpfulness and brotherly love, we see the first sign of their attitude toward humanity, which must lie at the root of all advance, and which is recognized as the truest sign of civilization. We cannot fully understand what an astounding contrast the Christian outlook presented to that of the pagan world in the first century of the Christian era, unless we have some conception of the state of awful corruption. We cannot fully understand what an astounding contrast the Christian outlook presented to that of the pagan world in the first century of the Christian era, unless we have some conception of the state of awful corruption into which Greek and Roman society had fallen. Mass orgies, etc., etc. It was just becoming so wicked, and apparently Rome grew weak, and they were attacked on all sides. There was rebellion from within, etc. The literature of the period was cynical in tone and full of the most shameless obscenity. The masses were entirely illiterate, and no provision was made for the education. So all these Caesars, they were too busy claiming that they were gods, from the gods, all this sort of stuff, all powerful, and they did every wicked abomination. They enjoyed it, right? And just got fat and lazy by the looks of it. The masses were entirely illiterate, and no provision was made for the education. In the cities, a large proportion of the population consisted of slaves who were looked upon as the property of their masters. Slave owners could beat, torture or kill their slaves, and the law proclaimed this to be within their rights. Not too sure on that one, because there was some decrees and protections put in place, like if a person was a minor, underage, you couldn't mess with them. There's like some sort of necklace or something that the Romans saw. This is what we're remembering from personal research into their history, that you couldn't touch them. It was against the law to touch them until they came of age. That sort of thing. Slaves were bought and sold in the open market like cattle. Well, that could possibly be in reference to Roman-born citizens, children, women, men, etc. Okay, so here, slave owners could beat, torture or kill their slaves, and the law proclaiming this to be within their rights. So that's the difference between servants, Jewish servants, and their slaves. There's a difference between servant and slave. So maybe the Romans had the same sort of idea. If you went Roman, you're a slave, and you can get beaten up, tortured, all that sort of stuff, and nobody could do a thing. It was their right to do such. Slaves were bought and sold in the open market like cattle. As porters, they were chained in front of the gate, just as with us a watchdog, and at night they were shut up in the ergastula like animals in stores. So it's some sort of cage or a pen or something. Like them, they were also branded and marked. They were also flogged and crucified, often on the smallest provocation. Just for any reason. Oh, you smiled, so off you go to be flogged. Generally, the old and diseased were turned off without concern, or were killed outright as men kill a brute beast, or they were no use to them. You're too old, you're useless, so whop, you're dead. So long as there was hope of profit from them, they were spared, and when they died, they were cast into a pit with dead animals, a bit like the Jews and Gehenna. your thief, your criminal killed, your corpse chucked over the wall on this continuing fire with your dead trees, dead animals, etc. Kept burning and kept stacked, burn night and day sort of thing. So long as there were hope for a profit from them, they were spared if they had money, right? And when they died, they were cast into a pit with dead animals. So with these Romans, if they could make $1 out of them, or a denarii or whatever it was, then they might keep them alive. There were exceptions to these barbarities. A refined gentleman like Pliny the Younger shows great consideration for his own domestic slaves, and there are constant references to kindly treatment. But the terrible slave wars show to what desperation the slaves were driven, and the general picture of the times is one of cruelty and vice in connection with slavery. Yes, the Romans were very hard, very mean. Like, people would grow crops, they'd take basically all of it. Poor priest that can't survive, they'd take it all in taxes, right? And it takes them even more and more and more. So how the heck could these people survive and live on? The cruelty and hard-hearted selfishness were only surpassed by the luxury and immortality. Small wonder that a note of consternation is apparent in the writings and speeches of the great men of the period. At the time when Nero was emperor, Seneca was a leading statesman and scholar of Rome. He thus describes the times in his day. All things are full of iniquity and vice. More crimes are committed than can be remedied by force. A monstrous contest of wickedness is carried on. Daily the lust of sin increases. Daily the sense of shame diminishes. Casting away all regard for what is good and honourable, pleasure runs riot without restraint, so there's no limit. Vice no longer hides itself, it stalks forth before all eyes, so public has iniquity become, so mightily does it flame up in all hearts, that innocence is no longer even rare. It has altogether ceased to exist. Even religion had become a cloak for the vilest immorality. The priestesses in the temples were prostitutes. Is that the Roman church temples or the Jewish ones? Because we did read about them having prostitutes, but we did read that they were male, but they could have been priestesses who were prostitutes, as it states here in that particular temple, and made no attempt to conceal it. Maybe that's actually talking about the Roman ones. When vice can walk abroad unashamed, it is not difficult to understand the degree to which a nation has fallen. Yeah, we think they're talking about the Roman temples. The geographer Strabo says that in the temple of Venus in Corinth there were more than 1,000 prostitutes. They had great privileges and sometimes presented to the goddess the vows and prayers of the city. This was also the state of affairs in the temple at Eryx in Sicily, where even Roman consuls and praetors participated in the vileness of those wicked deeds, wicked acts, indulgences, etc. So great was the depravity of the age that the Roman government found it necessary to pass special laws prohibiting women of high rank from registering themselves as public prostitutes. This they were in the habit of doing in order to be able to give unbridled rein to their evil passions. The pastimes and pleasures of the people offer another indication of the depth to which they had fallen. They show that the Romans at the beginning of the Christian era had become wholly unnatural and depraved in their taste. Simple and manly sports no longer attracted them. Nothing was interesting without the shedding of blood and the spectacle of death. High and low, rich and poor, flocked to the amphitheatre to see men killed by wild animals or pitted against each other in mortal combat. For the condemned criminals were trained in the schools attached to the various circuses, and upon great festivals were forced to kill each other to satisfy the unnatural craving for blood. As it may be supposed, such customs had a most demoralizing effect upon the public, rendering them day by day more brutal in disposition. The plays of the period also had a most evil effect. Their obscene character doubtless played a very distinct part in bringing about the moral degradation of the peoples of Rome itself. Contrast with this dark picture of cruelty, luxury and vice the account of the Christian sect, as we have it in section 2. Are we not justifying in saying that the contrast is truly astounding? What is the spectacle we see? A vast civilization containing within itself all the elements of decay or rot, arrayed against a small community, strong in nothing but its devotion to its crucified founder and its obedience to his command. Legislation or law could not destroy it, no decrees could destroy it. When its members were tortured and killed, it only grew the more it thought lightly of those things which the world loved and longed for, the death which the world feared, because they knew what they'd have after that: eternal life, the crown of life, and live forever with Christ in the kingdom or the heavens. The ancient customs and religions which had been unable to hinder the decay of the countries under their sway fell one by one before the new faith. So all these pagan secular religions fell to the side because they probably were converted to this Christian faith or Christianity. The accounts in the first and second sections shows how Christianity was received by the pagan world. We have only to read history to see how paganism fell before it. There was something in the new religion which made it different from other faiths or other beliefs, secular religions. The non-Christian Roman statesmen knew that they must give it no quarter, or it would carry everything before it. The historian Lampridius, himself a pagan, writes of the emperor. Scriptures, history, Augustus Lampridius, etc. down here. And he talks about it. This is a remarkable passage. What could the state of religion of the Roman Empire have to fear from this strange faith, the distinctive doctrine of which was devotion to a crucified Jew and faith that he was the Son of God? Yet, has not history proved that she had good reason to fear? And what has resulted from the entrance of Christianity into the world? Whether Christ has been truly the light of the world, each man will have to decide personally, and as the facts of history are before us, we can judge for ourselves. And so forth. In countries where Christianity has been accepted, but the New Testament has not been put into the hands of the common people, there has been progress indeed, but progress nothing like so rapid as in other parts of Christendom. There have been men of the noblest devotion, movements showing in wonderful ways the Christian spirit, but a tendency to stagnation among the masses of the people and a backwardness in economic and educational evolution. Probably because they're role players, not the real deal, and so forth. And it has something here about Japan. The philanthropic and educational institutions of the Christian West have been the pattern for everything of the kind in Japan. I say the Christian West, or the author says Christian West, because history shows us that almost every philanthropic venture of importance was first conceived and undertaken in the West by Christians. And now let us turn to India. India, the land of deep religious thought and earnest spiritual aspiration. It is as natural to be religious in India as to live and breathe and eat. It is a land of saints and sages, gurus, etc. And everywhere one meets those who are hungering for God. Atheism can find but little footing here in India, for most men recognize that the search for spiritual truth is the highest pursuit of man. Moreover, India is the land of the Vedas, probably the most ancient religious compositions in existence. Okay, these are probably the modernized versions of those original ancient Hindu, etc. religions. So there's a possibility that they believed in one God way back there in its origins, and then somebody's perverted it, corrupted it, and they started believing in a pantheon of gods, blue with 6 arms, etc., etc. That's a possibility that we read. So you'd have to go do your research on those original ancient Indian religions to see if there was a vast change from monotheism in India to polytheistic, or a pantheon of, say, 33,000 different gods. India is the land of the Vedas, probably the most ancient religious compositions in existence. While we of the West were wandering in the forests clad in skins, the sages of India were deep in their search for the eternal verities of the spiritual world. Systems of philosophy were built up and gave place to other systems. One thinker followed another, each leaving his contribution to the religious history of his people. Yet, where is India today? We are told that in the Vedic age India was in her glory. There was no dishonesty, no impurity or pride or jealousy among the people. Wow, that's quite brilliant. So there might have been something in India in those particular religions, with that belief system, or the variants there. There was no dishonesty, no impurity or pride or jealousy among the people. The Brahmins lived simply, austere and religious lives. The kings were brave and upright and faithful as Janaka, while probably certain sects did, if this is true. But what about the ones that supposedly ran and chased Thomas, the disciple, to a certain rock and then ran him through with a spear? Apparently they were Brahmins, zealous Brahmins. Probably because of that religion. At that time he was encroaching on theirs, and the people were believing him, following him, leaving their religions in droves. There's always a reason behind it. The Brahmins lived simple, austere and religious lives. The kings were brave and upright and faithful as Janaka. Women were as pure and loving as Sita. Sons were as obedient as Rama. Younger brothers were as dutiful as Bharata and Lakshman. The forests were full of saints and rishis. The dwellers in the towns were devoted to religion. Divine wisdom was among them in the forms of the Vedas. Yet, where is India today? The Vedas are said to contain the perfect and final wisdom of God. How could those who possessed this final wisdom come under the dominion of error and delusion? As we suggested, maybe somebody corrupted those religions at a later point, a later millennia or centuries. Are we to believe that even the perfect revelation of God himself will be unable to keep us from degeneration and degradation? Even suppose we again attain to that perfect condition of society which is said to have existed in Vedic times, how can we hope to continue in it? Good question. If we have enjoyed it once and then fallen from it, what will prevent us from again falling into degrading after having attained to perfection a second time? Well, it gives you time to ponder, to rethink, where did I go wrong? Why did I go wrong? How can I not go wrong next time? If this be true, who would blame India for settling down in torpor and inertia, or idleness, laziness, right? Why strive if we know that the attainment of our ideal is to be followed by another period of degeneration and decay? The saints of all countries and all ages have impressed upon our minds that we are not to set our mind upon things fleeting and temporal, but upon those things which are eternal. If the perfection to which we are hoping to attain be only temporal, followed by more degeneration and decay, why strive for it? If it is only temporal, why long for it? It is here that the great contrast lies. So it's a total commitment to it, total focus, brand new mindset, determination, concentration, focus, right? That you are going to follow this, you can follow it. Yeah, perfectly. Hindu religious history, if we are to accept the claims of those who assert that there was perfection in the Satyug, presents a spectacle of a people living in a state of spiritual and social perfection and blessed with the full revelation of God, yet gradually falling from that high estate and degenerating spiritually and socially until they have reached their present position, which they call the Kali Yuga. On the other hand, take the history of Christianity as we find it in this book, independently of Christian records. It does not claim to have first revealed itself to a perfected society. The world had never been in a more evil condition than at the time it first made its appearance. According to Hindu belief, God's wisdom as revealed in the Vedas was unable to save man from falling under the power of delusion and degradation. I would say there was a balance. You have to have evil, you have to have evil to balance that good, good to balance that evil. Probably something like that. According to Hindu belief, God's wisdom as revealed in the Vedas was unable to save man from falling. It's probably because of the state of man himself, inward man, under the power of delusion and degradation. According to the history of Christianity, all the forces of evil, the wisdom of the world, the material Roman Empire, the hatred and contempt and persecutions of the masses were unable to hinder the spread of the Christian faith. As a light dispelling the darkness that came with its higher ideals and loftier manner of life. Wherever it found root, it seemed to bring new life, with the promise of new life. The messengers of the gospel of peace traversed the great forest which before had echoed to the tread of marauding armies. The latter had gone in their strength to kill and take captive. The former went in their weakness, not to kill, but if need be, to die for their faith. Yet in the end it was not the Roman legions which conquered the Germanic tribes, but the gospel of Christ, or tamed them. This too is history, as all who read may know. Throughout Europe and America, as we have already pointed out, spiritual, mental and material progress are most evident where the New Testament is most treasured and read. To put it in a few words, if Vedic times were perfect times, the Hindu position has been the Vedas and a steady degeneration. A position of Christianity according to history has been the New Testament and steady progress toward the light. The history of Hinduism, according to both Sanyatin, Dharmists and Arya Samajists alike, has been from light to darkness. The history of Christianity has been from darkness into an ever increasing light, and so forth. And the last is Celsus the Epicurean, who without doubt was the most formidable of the literary opponents of Christianity in the 2nd century. His attacks upon the Christian religions are marked by a spirit of great hostility, and his method of approaching the subject shows that he was a man of keen and vigorous intellect. His book was called The True Discourse. It is only known from Origen's reply to it, but as Origen quotes his adversary's words and answers them point by point, we may gather the original works of Celsus from his pages. This apology of Origen is the greatest of the apologies. Eusebius, who they theologians, scholars, etc., say, yeah, this guy can't really be trusted 100%. Says of it, at this time also he composed in 8 books a reply to that work written against us by Celsus, the Epicurean, bearing the title The True Doctrine. The work of Celsus was written some 80 years before Origen's answer to it, or about AD 170. We can only touch upon a few of the points taken up by Celsus, so we suggest you go do some research on Celsus, the final in this book. That's your homework. Okay, and it's got all these references to him and what he did, and possibly how he may have converted sometime later. Maybe. Maybe not. And here is what we feel pretty important, because in one of our videos before we talked about Ptolemy, Serapis Christus, Soter, and this brotherhood or cult of Serapis Christus. And this is part of the text of a letter from the Emperor Hadrian to Silvanus in about 34 or 134 AD. Probably 134 AD. Hadrianus Augustus Silvanio Consuli Salutum Egyptum quam mihi laudabas, etc. It's probably in Latin. Yeah, it's in Latin. Translation: Hadrian Augustus greets Silvanus the consul. This is Hadrian the emperor. Built Hadrian's wall. My very dear Silvanus, Egypt, of which you spoke so highly, I have found to be light, fickle, fluttering at every touch of rumour. Those who profess to worship Serapis are Christians, and those who call themselves Christian bishops are devotees of Serapis. There is not a ruler of a Jewish synagogue there. There is not a Samaritan. There is not a Christian presbyter who is not a wizard or a soothsayer or a scoundrel of some sort. Pressure is put on the patriarch himself when he comes to Egypt, on the one hand to adore Serapis, on the other Christ. As a race, they are full of sedition, vanity and spite. The community is opulent, rich, fruitful, without a man of leisure in it. Cash is their only god. So that religion of the Serapis Christus, the brotherhood of Serapis Christus, was wicked. It was unrighteous. It was all about money. Money was the god. But Piscus was one of those 6 authors who are called Historiae Augustae Scriptores. He was born in Syracuse, etc., etc. Phlegon was one of Hadrian's freedmen who wrote a number of books on various subjects, of which some fragments only remain. One thing is most probable, that whether the letter is truly from the hand of Hadrian or not, it was edited by one who lived during his rule, AD 117 to 138. We may therefore feel justified in believing that we are in possession of a non-Christian document written by someone either during or at most shortly after Hadrian's time, in which distinct mention is made of Christian bishops and presbyters. The patriarch is the Jewish patriarch of Tiberias. Lightfoot, who is one of the greatest modern authorities on the subject, writes with regard to the letter, this document is considered genuine by such opposite authorities as Tillemont, History of the Emperors 2, page 265, and Gregorius, LC, page 41, and may be accepted without hesitation. Appendix 4, the alias Lampredus, writing upon the reign of Elagabalus, AD 118 to 222, relates how the emperor made plans for a temple on the Palatine hill in which he might collect together all the cults of the various Roman gods, and thither also he intended to transfer the Jewish and Samaritan religions and the Christian devotions that he, Elagabalus, might be priest of them, and so forth. Okay, so that's the end of that book. It just suddenly ended there, but look at it. Okay, that was the appendix, that's what. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Go back there, we just saw something. Hadrian Augustus greets Silvanus the consul. My very dear Silvanus, Egypt of which you spoke so highly are found to be light, fickle, etc. Okay, we already covered that. About them adoring Serapis, and in other days the Christ. So it's kind of weird, right? 1 minute they're into Serapis worship, and then next day they're into Christ. Weird. When was that? 134 AD or something? Presbyter. There is not a Christian presbyter who is not a wizard or soothsayer or a scoundrel of some sort. Pressure is put on the patriarch himself. He's the head of that particular movement. When he comes to Egypt, on the one hand to adore Serapis, on the other Christ. As a race they are full of sedition, vanity and spite. The community is opulent, rich, fruitful, without a man of leisure in it. So it's saying there basically every man's a man of leisure within it. Cash is their only god, or coin. So we hope that this has opened your eyes to the Christ through these many non-Jewish, non-Christian writers, Josephus, Tacitus, Eusebius, Pliny the Younger, and so forth. If you enjoyed this video, finding it very informative, subscribe to us, give us a like, add your comments below, and then go share this wake up video to all of your friends, family, neighbours and church friends, etc.